our elections. I mean, you know my background. I'm a first-generation American, and when your family has fled communism, you understand that liberty and freedom aren't just something that we talk about. It's something that you have to live and nurture and pass on to generations. It's not something we're born with. And so my guiding principle, my star through my entire time as Attorney General has always been the U.S. Constitution. And we need to make sure that we are a nation of laws, and we always need to remind the federal government that the states created the federal government and that our rights do not come from the federal government. They come from our creator. And I'm going to do everything I can for as long as I can to fight for the rule of law in our Constitution.
Well, I want to thank you. Your family escaped communism, as did mine. My father escaped from a communist prison. What you are doing truly is what America is about, a republic of states. Let me ask you, God give you all the power you need to win this fight. Do you see other attorneys general across the United States likewise understanding their constitutional duty to protect their elections?
I do. I think there's definitely a group of us that understand the role of the state attorneys general is to make sure we do push back against the federal government. You know, if you go back and you read even the Federalist Papers, you know, the framers of our Constitution recognize that, you know, we all hear about checks and balances, you know, the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branch, but the states were also supposed to be a check on the federal government. And Madison talked about the states zealously guarding the freedom and liberties of their people. And so there are AGs out there that are doing that, but we need more. We need more help. And so often now, the mainstream media, academia, higher education, all the stuff that's going on with critical race theory and the 1619 Project, it's all designed to undermine middle America's independence, confidence in this greatest country in the world. And when they do that, there's all these forces fighting, you know, against you. And so it's important for us to stand up. And Sebastian, it's important for people to support AGs like myself and some of my colleagues that are standing up and trying to push back against the overreach of Washington, D.C., that are trying to secure our borders, that are trying to make sure we protect our Second Amendment rights, that once again, there's this fundamental premise of the far left where they want us to become dependent on the federal government. And they have this fundamentally flawed notion that rights don't come from the creator, that they come from government. And so we need to really be pushing back as hard as we can on so many fronts against the far left, because it's not just about them trying to, you know, take control of the election. They're trying to undermine our property rights. They're trying to undermine our religious liberties, because as you know, you and I have talked about that, you know, in communist countries, you know, you eradicate the family, you eliminate religion, and you make people dependent on a central government. And I would submit to you, if you look at what's going on, that is the script. That is the script of AOC and Chuck and Nancy and the far left of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, well, we need more people like you, whichever state you come from. Support individuals like Mark Brnovich, because it is about the future of a free America. Next, thanks. What exactly happened in last year's election? What do you need to know about the irregularities, to put it mildly? We'll give you the facts here on the Gawker. Every day on my radio show, America First, or on my social media platforms, I get callers, I get messages from patriots who say, that's it, I've given up. The last election, it was just a farce. I don't even want to vote again. Well, that's un-American. As the great Rush Limbaugh taught us, Americans never give up. But how do we stop them from doing it again? You can't fix a problem unless you know what the problem really is. Let's talk to a man who's done more than most to investigate everything that happened last year in our elections. Former Attorney General for the great state of Kansas, now with Liberty University, the Executive Director of the Amistad Project. Phil Klein, welcome to Newsmax.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Sebastian.
So, Phil, let me just run a couple of headlines that people may not be familiar with, which I think are the biggest untold story of last year's election. And they have to do with social media, and specifically Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. Whether it's NPR or whether it's other sources, we have these headlines about hundreds of millions of dollars being invested by the CEO of Facebook, by his wife, through various front organizations, including something called the Center for Technology and Civic Life, that was used to help, quote unquote, run the elections across America. Talk to us about what this organization is, and what were they really doing with that almost $500 million of private funds?
Well, Sebastian, the American election in 2020 was hacked from within. There were a group of leftist nonprofits, and chief among them was the Center for Tech and Civic Life, that received $350 million from Zuckerberg, more monies from Skoll Foundation, from Google, and so forth, and big tech. And they poured those monies directly into election centers in the urban core and swing states. And we believe that the evidence that we've obtained now through months and months of investigation demonstrate for the purpose of turning out the vote for Joe Biden. That those monies were invested to get government to play favorites in the election. As an example, in Wisconsin alone, they used these monies. Now, these are government offices. These are not campaigns. Mr. Zuckerberg could have given money to the Biden campaign. He probably did. But of course, he'd be limited by law. Or he could have spent the money himself independently, but of course he wouldn't have got a tax deduction. Instead, he funneled these monies through nonprofits who then bought up government offices. In Green Bay, they kicked out the elections clerk and private interests ran the election. In Philadelphia, they paid the election judges. They paid the people who were boarding up the windows in Michigan. They ran the election as a shadow government. So back to Wisconsin.
Right. So Phil, let me just Phil, you used a phrase here that some people may misunderstand. You used the phrase hacked the election. You're not talking about these outre theories of people in other countries or computers being used. This is old school interference. This is private individuals putting drop boxes where, Democrat strongholds exist. We are talking about old school interference. Is that a better description?
Yes, it is. And in fact, what they did is they made these Democrat stronghold election officials partisan persons to manage the election to benefit Mr. Biden. And where they didn't do it, they booted them out, as in Green Bay. So you've got, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, Sebastian, it is common in advertising. It is also common in campaigns where you engage in geofencing. In other words, you pull all the data that you would have on an individual through their phones, what ads they look at, what they purchased, their Facebook postings, all of that information. And then you project or anticipate their conduct. Well, you had election offices doing that to identify infrequent voters who would possibly or more likely vote for Biden, and then government went out and got them to vote. That is a campaign activity, not a government activity. And this happened. Yes, I'm sorry.
It's an incredible story. I mean, we're talking about almost $500 million used to take over with personnel, with training, local officials, local authorities that should be run by those states. I want all our viewers to understand how serious the evidence is. What is your website, Phil?
Our website is the AmericanVotersAlliance.com. It got freedom is now the American Voters Alliance. So we would encourage everybody to visit there. A lot of this evidence is posted. Our investigations and our litigation continue. And Sebastian, you mentioned $500 million. That's not all of it by any means. That's primarily the Zuckerberg money. You have other individuals pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars. We've identified now over 20 nonprofits that are leftist leaning. They did everything from enter into unprecedented contracts with blue state officials to gather sensitive citizen information. Our government.
We're out of time, Phil. I need our viewers to go to your website, see the evidence, but now we have to switch the discussion to how we stop them doing it next time. That's going to be our next panel here on the Gawker Reality Check. Thank you, Phil Klein, for doing what you do. How do we stop them in the next? The severe problems with the elections last year just doesn't seem to be an issue for the legacy lying media, just like the materials on Hunter Biden's laptop or the strange origins of the coronavirus and their connection to the virology lab in Wuhan. Two people who have been doggedly in pursuit of the truth are joining us tonight on the Gawker Reality Check. First, the author of the incredible book Fallout, the man who founded and is now editor-in-chief of the incredible website justthenews.com, John Solomon. and the chair of the new Election Integrity Alliance, former attorney to President Trump. Full disclosure, guys, Jenna Ellis invited me on the board, so I am now a member of that board as well. Welcome, both of you, to the Gorka Reality Check. Let's start with you, John. Could you explain, as somebody who's worked in the media for decades, now has his own media empire, why is the integrity of the last election seemingly not an issue for the legacy media? And why does anybody who raises a question, why are they labeled conspiracy theorists?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer why the conspiracy theory label works, but listen, every conspiracy theory that was called out before has dissipated. There's a shortage. There's more shortages of conspiracy theories right now for the leftist media than there are gas and lumber, and that's saying something. I think at the end of the day, the media dug down so hard after the election to say nothing had happened. Just like Russia collusion in some of the other cases, they don't want to go back and admit that maybe they didn't have the whole story. Maybe they debunked something that shouldn't have been debunked. And I think that stubbornness not to look back at their own reporting and realize that there are chinks in the story that they gave the American people after the election, the temptation is too great to just ignore it.
Sooner or later, we will get to the truth, the various audits, the reporting from the great people at justthenews.com. Jenna, tell us in the meantime, what is the mission of the Election Integrity Alliance? What are they doing now? And what can they do to make sure we don't have any of these issues the next time around?
Yeah, well, we're so grateful to have you on the board, Seb, along with our good friends Bernie Carrick and Attorney General Ken Paxton, who, of course, led the charge for election integrity, preserved the state of Texas in 2020. So the Election Integrity Alliance's mission is to make sure that what happened in 2020 with the absolute failures of the administration of the 2020 election never happens again. We should all want transparency. We should all want security. We should all want the Biden DOJ that just yesterday is now filing a lawsuit in the state of Georgia to try to interfere with elections because the Senate failed to pass S1, which would federalize elections. And so now the Biden DOJ has to try to pick up the slack and do that from a litigation perspective. This is absolutely ridiculous. So the Election Integrity Alliance's mission is to be the centralized hub of all of our allies across the country who are concerned about election integrity and putting back in safeguards to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. We should all want that.
Yes, indeed. John, for 4 years we were told that the last election was stolen, that there was Russian collusion, Putin bought Facebook ads. None of that was proven to be true. There were no apologies from the mainstream media for having spun that propaganda for 4 years. What happens if we see massive indications, if we actually have empirical proof that something bad happened in those key states during the election and after the election? What's the mainstream media going to do then? Are they finally going to apologize for miscovering these stories?
Well, I wouldn't hold your breath for an apology, but listen, I think facts over time come out. The reason that the Russia collusion story unraveled is that undeniable facts came to light. For instance, that the Carter Page wasn't a Russian stooge, he actually was a CIA asset, that the FBI lied. In this case, those facts are beginning to emerge on the election front. Take a look at the 29-page memo that we published last week at Just the News from the official election observer that Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger sent to Georgia. 29 pages of very damning misbehavior in the Atlanta Election Counting Center. Double counting ballots, not protecting people's voter identity, transporting ballots in insecure manners, workers untrained to do the job, some of them boasting they were there not to count votes but to wreak havoc. Those things are now in the public record. I think as more facts come out, journalists will, in a backhanded way, start to acknowledge them, but I would never hold out for an apology. We never got one on Russia. We never got one on the Lafayette Square. We never got one on the fake story about Afghan bounties. And I'm sure in this one, they'll just sweep their past transgressions under the rug and move on to the next story.
Jenna, we're almost out of time, but I have to show this incredible imagery from